The platinum fountain pen resting on the polished oak of Windsor Castle clicked once against the wood as Prince William pushed it aside, instantly dismantling a stealth legal maneuver months in the making. The heir to the throne had crossed the threshold of the private council chamber, expecting to assist a frail father with routine state paperwork. Less than 60 seconds later, he turned sharply on his heel and walked out. There was no explosive exchange, no slammed doors, no raised voices. The rupture occurred in near absolute silence, marked only by the dull thud of a heavy leather-bound portfolio snapping shut. Suspicion took root the moment William bypassed the sanitized executive summary, sitting neatly on top. Instead of accepting the high-level brief, his fingers flicked straight to the dense, fine-print appendices hidden at the back. Under royal protocol, a medical power of attorney grants temporary administrative authority to manage official duties during a monarch's incapacity. It is an instrument designed to preserve the continuity of the crown, not to redistribute its physical holdings. Yet buried beneath complex legal phrasing, then came the telltale slip. Scanning the perimeter of the room, William's eyes locked onto a figure standing quietly near the window drapery, Camilla's personal solicitor. This was not the Treasury solicitor or an official counselor from the royal household, but a private attorney bound solely to the Queen's personal financial interests. That single unannounced presence exposed the ambush. It was never a medical authorization. It was a binding property transfer disguised as filial duty. Was Prince William's decisive exit a masterclass in protecting the future of the monarchy, or a ruthless rejection of an ailing father trying to secure his wife's future? Type 1 in the comments if you stand with the prince, or type 2 if you believe his reaction lacked family empathy. To fully understand why a single unsigned folder could shake the foundations of the House of Windsor, one must look at the mounting pressure that made such an ambush possible. The entire gathering was conceived under the long, darkening shadow of a ticking clock. When King Charles III disclosed his cancer diagnosis, the emotional and institutional temperature across the royal estate shifted overnight. Questions regarding succession, estate management, and private property rights ceased to be distant, theoretical debates for the next decade. They acquired an unrelenting urgency. Behind closed doors, a quiet panic began to take hold. Nothing accelerates the maneuvering of a royal household quite like an uncertain medical timeline. Every sovereign reign operates under the immutable reality that power is lent, not owned, and the window to solidify personal legacies narrows with every passing month. In the quiet corridors of Clarence House, advisors realized that any restructuring of private assets or residential guarantees had to be finalized, while Charles still held the supreme authority of the monarch. Once the crown passed to his successor, the leverage would vanish forever. Thus, the strategy was forged. The summit would not be billed as a high-stakes financial negotiation or a division of royal properties. Instead, it was framed as a tender, deeply personal matter of filial duty. The official narrative presented to Prince William was an administrative request to sign a medical and operational power of attorney. Under British constitutional traditions, an instrument of delegation allows councillors of state or the direct heir to step in and execute routine state business, sign royal assents, and oversee medical directives when the reigning sovereign is incapacitated by illness. It was a reasonable, necessary administrative bridge designed to relieve an ailing father of the crushing weight of daily red tape. The choice of venue was equally calculated. Official state business is traditionally conducted within the formal, austere halls of Buckingham Palace, where every movement is logged and every advisor is present. Private political maneuvering usually belongs to Clarence House, the king's personal turf. But Windsor Castle represents something entirely different. Windsor is the emotional hearth of the royal family, a sanctuary soaked in centuries of intimate ancestral memory. By convening the meeting within the private suites of Windsor, the architects of the plan deliberately stripped away the cold armor of statehood. The location subtly commanded William to enter not as the uncompromising heir to the throne, but as a devoted son coming to comfort a sick father. The emotional engineering was meticulous. The setup banked on the assumption that a son witnessing his father's physical decline would be overwhelmed by empathy and haste. The thick leather folder placed on the table was intentionally intimidating, running hundreds of pages deep with dense administrative jargon, technical medical directives, and complex operational schedules. Placed neatly on top was a concise, beautifully summarized executive page, highlighting only the noble intention of assisting the king with his burdensome workload. The plan relied on a vulnerable moment. It assumed William would glance at his father's frail frame, feel the heavy sting of mortality, skim the innocent summary page, and sign the document without demanding to read the fine print hidden deep within the appendices. King Charles himself was caught in a heartbreaking paradox. Facing his own mortality with grim clarity, his overriding concern was not personal power, but the uncertain future of the woman he had fought for decades to marry. Upon a king's death, a queen consort undergoes a brutal institutional downgrade, transitioning overnight to a queen dowager. The vast machinery of state, the grand residences, the dedicated staff, and the royal influence automatically transfer to the new monarch. Knowing the deep-seated, cold distance that had persisted between William and Camilla for over 20 years, Charles harbored a profound fear that his wife would be left utterly unprotected, stripped of her comforts, and cast out to the cold margins of the court once he was gone. Blinded by a husband's desperate desire to build an impenetrable wall around his wife, the king allowed his own medical condition to be weaponized. He permitted a deeply personal, sensitive document about his own health to serve as a Trojan horse. The calculated tragedy was that the warmth of the room, the soft lighting, the quiet tea service, and the solemn atmosphere of paternal frailty were not gestures of hospitality. They were tools of disarming precision. Every element was arranged to lower William's defenses to the precise point where a nod of accommodation or a hasty signature could be secured under the guise of family solidarity. Yet, this strategy overlooked the hardened reality of the man walking into the room. William was not a naive prince easily swayed by sentimental staging. He had spent his entire life observing the silent machinery of the court, learning early on that the royal institution operates most ruthlessly when it wraps itself in the softest words. Using a father's illness as a shield to smuggle in permanent property concessions was the ultimate gamble. It was a strategy born out of desperate fear, disguised as filial love, and destined to detonate the moment it met a prince who measured every room by the traps it might contain. To truly grasp the lethal mechanics of the trap laid inside Windsor Castle, one must look past the polished mahogany tables and analyze the exact architecture of the document resting upon them. The true nature of the meeting did not reside in the innocent, white summary page placed so invitingly on top of the stack. That single page spoke only of devotion, duty, and streamlined administrative care. It outlined a seamless procedure for Prince William to sign off on routine state papers and medical contingency plans should King Charles become temporarily incapacitated. It was drafted in the warm, reassuring prose of familial support, designed to put any hesitation to rest. Beneath that single sheet of paper lay over 300 pages of dense, suffocating legalese, technical appendices, and complex operational schedules. Buried deep within those unread pages, tucked neatly inside a section nominally dedicated to estate maintenance and seasonal residential logistics, was the poison pill. It was a single, meticulously constructed clause, written in the cold, impenetrable language of property law. This hidden clause did not deal with temporary medical oversight or administrative convenience. It mandated the automatic, permanent, and irrevocable transfer of administrative authority over several prime crown residences directly to Queen Camilla upon the king's death. Furthermore, it locked in guaranteed lifetime funding from specific royal trusts, effectively ring-fencing a massive portfolio of property, staff, and institutional influence long after Charles's reign had ended. In effect, the document attempted to grant Camilla an unassailable financial and residential stronghold within the royal estate, insulated entirely from the future monarch's authority. Under standard constitutional norms, the sovereign's private residences and the broader portfolio of crown estates revert to the control of the incoming king upon succession. The reigning monarch holds the crown in trust for future generations. It is not a personal inheritance to be carved up or gifted away in perpetuity. To grant a queen consort locked-in, permanent control over historic royal seats before the current reign has even concluded is to place a heavy mortgage on the next king's sovereignty. It represents a direct preemption of the heir's constitutional prerogative, executed while the current king still holds the supreme authority to validate it. Had William simply signed the document based on the innocent top summary, he would have unknowingly ratified an irrevocable contract. The top summary made no mention of property rights, trust structures, or post-reign residential transfers. It focused exclusively on medical permissions and routine state approvals, deliberately concealing the financial payload hidden in the fine print. The entire operation hinged on the assumption that a dutiful son, moved by his father's frailty, would accept the summary on faith and sign the signature page at the back without scrutinizing the appendices. Yet, even the most carefully constructed legal trap requires a human trigger, and it was here that the architects of the plan made their fatal blunder. Standing discreetly near the heavy velvet drapery of the window was a figure who had no rightful place in a private family conference, Queen Camilla's personal solicitor. There is a profound, non-negotiable difference between an official counselor representing the crown as an institution and a private attorney representing an individual's personal estate. In normal royal proceedings, state matters are managed by the Treasury solicitor or the official legal advisor to the royal household. These institutional lawyers owe their allegiance to the crown itself, ensuring that all agreements align with constitutional law and the long-term interests of the monarchy. Their presence guarantees impartiality and adherence to established protocol. The woman standing by the window was neither of these. She was a private attorney whose sole professional obligation was to protect and maximize Queen Camilla's personal financial interests. Her presence transformed the entire character of the room in an instant. A gathering advertised as an intimate, off-the-record family conversation about a father's health had been secretly converted into a formal legal proceeding. Her true function in that room was as lethal as it was quiet. She was not there to offer legal advice to the king, nor was she there to guide Prince William through complex state procedures. She was stationed by the window to act as an official legal witness. The moment William's pen touched the paper, her presence would legally certify that the agreement had been executed freely, in the presence of legal counsel and with full knowledge of its contents. Once witnessed and stamped by a private solicitor, an informal gesture of filial accommodation would instantly harden into a legally binding contract. Any future attempt by William to challenge the agreement upon ascending the throne would be met with an unyielding legal defense backed by a sworn witness testimony stating that the heir had willingly signed the document in a room full of family. The definitive proof of bad faith lay not in the lawyer's presence, but in her concealment. William had been provided with an advance guest list days before traveling to Windsor, a standard security and protocol measure for any senior royal gathering. The private solicitor's name was conspicuously absent from that list. She had been brought in quietly through a private side entrance, positioned in the room before William arrived, and left off all official itineraries. This omission was the unmistakable fingerprint of an ambush. If her presence had been innocent, if she had been brought in merely to certify standard medical documents or offer routine legal clarity, her name would have been disclosed openly in advance. Transparency is the hallmark of legitimate proceedings. Secrecy is the sanctuary of the trap. Her name was kept off the guest list because those who arranged the summit knew with absolute certainty that if William saw a private solicitor on the agenda, he would have refused to step foot in the room. They relied entirely on the element of surprise, hoping to trap him in a corner where refusing to sign in front of his ailing father would feel impossibly cold. They built an environment designed to disarm him, using the warmth of Windsor Castle and the shadow of his father's illness as cover. But by placing a private attorney in the corner of a private room, they left behind a glaring clue that betrayed the entire operation before a single word could be spoken. The moment Prince William crossed the threshold into the council chamber, his heightened instincts picked up the structural anomaly in the room. A medical authorization for the sovereign was an institutional matter, one that called for the royal household's legal advisors or the king's personal counsel. Yet standing near the window, discreetly positioned to observe, was the private solicitor representing his stepmother's personal estate. The institutional mismatch was glaring. A document framed as a son's medical proxy for his ailing father was being oversaw by an attorney whose sole professional allegiance belonged to Queen Camilla. That single discrepancy instantly shattered the illusion of a family gathering. Rather than taking his seat at the heavy mahogany table, William remained standing. The gesture was small, but it completely disrupted the calculated rhythm of the room. When invited to review the white summary page, sitting neatly on top of the portfolio, he ignored it entirely. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, flipping past the reassuring opening pages and going straight to the dense, fine-print appendices at the back of the folder. His eyes locked onto the specific legal phrasing tucked deep within the technical provisions. There, written in cold, uncompromising legalese, was the clause that stripped his future sovereign authority over key historic residences and locked in permanent estate allocations beyond the current reign. The mechanics of the ambush were plain. The document was not an administrative bridge for a sick king. It was an irrevocable property transfer designed to bypass his future consent. What followed was a masterclass in executive discipline. In situations where others might have exploded in anger, demanded explanations, or engaged in a heated confrontation, William chose complete emotional detachment. He knew that raising his voice or expressing outrage would hand the other side the very tool they needed, a narrative painting the heir as combative, paranoid, or disrespectful toward his vulnerable father. A dramatic scene would shift the focus away from the deceptive document and onto his temper. Without a word of accusation, he closed the leather-bound portfolio with a single, deliberate movement. The heavy cover snapped shut, cutting through the quiet of the room. He picked up the platinum fountain pen that had been laid out for his signature and placed it back onto the wooden tray, exactly where it had rested before. He looked across the table and delivered his verdict in a calm, measured tone. He stated simply that the meeting would not be proceeding and that no administrative documents or authorizations would be signed that day. He offered no debate, invited no counter-arguments, and waited for no excuses. Having delivered his statement, he turned on his heel and walked straight out of the chamber. The entire sequence took less than 60 seconds. In under a minute, months of careful legal drafting, strategic planning, and emotional staging collapsed completely. By refusing to sit down, refusing to engage, and refusing to argue, William dismantled the trap without ever naming it. He denied them his signature, but more importantly, he denied them a confrontation that could be leaked or weaponized. The room was left in absolute silence, holding an unsigned contract and a private solicitor whose presence had undone the entire plan before a single drop of ink was spilled. To understand the emotional gravity behind those 60 seconds at Windsor, one must look past the legal maneuvers and examine the raw human motives driving both sides. At the core of the ambush was a visceral, deeply human panic experienced by Queen Camilla. Her situation within the royal architecture is inherently precarious. As queen consort, her grandeur, her staff, her access to historic residences, and her central place within the state are entirely borrowed assets. They flow directly from her husband's position on the throne. The moment King Charles passes away, that borrowed authority evaporates overnight. Camilla will transition into a queen dowager, a widowed consort stripped of the operational core of the monarchy. The vast machinery of state automatically shifts to the new sovereign, Prince William, and his wife, Catherine. History has repeatedly shown how coldly the court treats those who drift from its center to its edges. For Camilla, the impending change of reign represents a steep, terrifying drop in standing. She faces the prospect of losing her primary homes, her institutional backing, and her public role, leaving her entirely dependent on the goodwill of a stepson with whom she has shared a strained, distant relationship for over 20 years. Her attempt to lock in property rights and financial guarantees while Charles remains king was not driven by simple greed. It was an act of self-preservation. Watching her husband's health fluctuate served as an unyielding reminder that her window of leverage was rapidly closing. Once the crown passes to William, the answer to any request for extraordinary privileges will be a permanent no. King Charles found himself trapped in a painful personal dilemma. Facing his own mortality, his primary concern as a husband was to ensure that the woman he had fought for decades to marry would not be left vulnerable or cast out by a cold court after his death. He knew the deep-seated resentment that lingered beneath the surface of his family. Driven by a desperate need to protect his wife, Charles allowed his authority and his delicate medical situation to be used as a shield, hoping to secure a binding compromise before his power slipped away. Yet, if fear drove the trap, trauma dictated the response. For Prince William, the presence of a hidden lawyer and a disguised contract triggered a reaction far deeper than mere legal caution. It tapped into a profound, lifelong scar left by the institution's past actions. As a boy, William watched his mother, Princess Diana, navigate the silent, manipulative machinery of the royal court. He saw how advisors used polite words, closed-door meetings, and complex legal arrangements to maneuver her into vulnerable positions, stripping away her protections while dressing the process up as institutional necessity. He was only 15 years old when he learned the permanent, brutal lesson of what happens when the court decides someone has become inconvenient. Walking into that Windsor council chamber decades later, seeing a warm family setting secretly staged around a private attorney, William did not see a loving father or a worried stepmother. He saw the same machine doing what the machine has always done, wearing a friendly, concerned face to engineer an outcome behind closed doors. The attempt to use his father's illness and his own filial duty to maneuver him into signing away future sovereign rights felt like a direct continuation of the tactics that had undone his mother. His refusal to sign was an act of institutional self-defense, but it was also a personal reckoning. It was a rejection of the subtle, emotional manipulation that had plagued his family for generations. By putting down the pen and walking out, William sent an unmistakable message to the household advisors and to his stepmother. He made it clear that the future reign would not be pre-written by covert agreements, and that he would never allow himself to be managed by ploys hiding behind the guise of family affection. By choosing complete silence over an explosive confrontation, Prince William executed a tactical masterclass in palace politics. In the high-stakes chess game of royal power, a public outburst or a shouting match is a fatal misstep. Had William lost his temper, raised his voice, or traded accusations with his stepmother, he would have handed her advisers the exact weapon they needed to reframe the entire narrative. They would have leaked accounts of a hostile, aggressive heir, berating an ailing father and a distressed queen consort, painting William as an unfeeling bully and flipping the public sympathy entirely in Camilla's favor. Instead, William's absolute restraint stripped his opponents of any counterplay. He offered no harsh words, made no dramatic scenes, and gave no emotional reaction that could be weaponized. He simply stated his position with cold, polite clarity, closed the portfolio, and walked away. There were no damning quotes to leak to favored correspondents, no doors slammed in anger, and no hysterical outbursts to report. There was only an empty chair, an unsigned folder, and a profound, deafening silence. That silence left Queen Camilla, her private attorney, and the king's inner circle stranded in an impossible position. They were left holding a flawed, unexecuted legal document in a room built for a triumph that never came. The private solicitor, brought in so discreetly to witness a historic surrender of authority, found her presence rendered entirely useless and deeply embarrassing. You cannot build a narrative of victimhood around a man who was impeccably composed and merely declined to be maneuvered. William's silent departure denied them the confrontation, and without a confrontation, they had no story to tell. The reverberations of the failed ambush quickly reached the one person whose institutional judgment carries absolute authority within the royal house, Princess Anne. Known as the unwavering guardian of protocol and the ultimate institutionalist, the Princess Royal has spent a lifetime upholding the strict rules that keep the monarchy functioning. Anne's devotion is not to personal factions or court gossip, but to the integrity of the crown itself. When the details of the Windsor summit were brought before her, Anne's reaction was swift and uncompromising. From her perspective, injecting a private attorney into an informal family gathering under the guise of an administrative medical proxy was a grotesque breach of royal procedure. She recognized that bending established protocols to force a private financial outcome erodes the very foundation of the institution. Anne's internal verdict was unambiguous. William was entirely justified in walking out of a room that should never have been constructed in such a manner. Her intervention provided William with unassailable institutional cover. While critics might try to spin the heir's departure as a cold display of power by an impatient successor, Anne's backing locked in the true interpretation across the senior ranks of the household. When the family's most respected arbiter of protocol declares a meeting improper, the debate is effectively over. To ensure such an ambush could never be staged again, a strict new procedural mandate was established across all royal households. A permanent rule was handed down. Any future presence of personal legal representation at internal royal meetings must be formally disclosed to all attending parties in writing at least 48 hours in advance. In a single, decisive move, William and Anne shut down the procedural loophole that the Windsor summit was engineered to exploit. The quiet room, the warm family framing, and the lawyer hidden in the corner would never happen again. The collapse of the Windsor summit shattered whatever fragile truce remained between the heir to the throne and Queen Camilla. By attempting to force a binding property settlement under the cover of a medical proxy, Camilla's faction exhausted their final avenue of soft negotiation. Every future request, every administrative proposal, and every discussion regarding her estate will now be viewed by Prince William through the cold lens of a man who has already caught her side, setting an ambush. Queen Camilla is now left facing the precise reality she desperately sought to avoid. When the present reign ends, her future will not be protected by locked-in legal guarantees or pre-signed trusts. It will rest entirely upon the unilateral discretion of a king who owes her no favors. In the silent, ruthless power dynamics of the palace, victory did not belong to those who drafted the most intricate legal trap. It belonged to the man sharp enough to read the room in a single glance and disciplined enough to walk out before the doors could close around him. William secured his future authority not by winning an argument, but by denying his opponents the room to have one. Yet behind this tactical victory lies a bitter human toll. In shutting down the trap, William may have also slammed the door on any genuine reconciliation, leaving an aging father caught between a wife he cannot protect and a son who refuses to be managed. Will Prince William's unyielding stance be remembered as a masterclass in protecting the crown, or as the decisive moment that permanently fractured a royal family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the hidden power struggles shaping history.